Good? All right. Okay, so the title of this class is Winning the Contract. So we're going to kind of go over some elements of how to make your contract a winning contract so that it gets accepted. And then we're also going to go over kind of a scenario, okay, of just a hypothetical situation and what can you do to make your offer stand out, okay? So I think this class is really important when it becomes more of a seller's market. You know what I mean? When it's a buyer's market, like your buyers are kind of calling the shots anyways. None of you have really been in the business during a strong buyer's market, like before the boom and when the bust happened, like buyers were naming the terms. Oh, you want 180? Oh, I'll give you 160 and you pay my closing costs. You know, it's really a weird situation because most of us know the seller's market. Okay, so in a seller's market, you need to be more strategic and tactical about how you approach the situation, especially when there's multiple offers on the property. Yeah? Okay, so we're going to talk about what are the elements to an offer to make it more compelling to a seller so that you get yours accepted. I mean, I think you would all agree that you want to write as few offers as possible for the same client, right? It'd be best to just be kind of a one and done, okay? All right, so before we talk about the critical contract points in regards to negotiations, we take a step back, and this is a run-on class of the last one, which was showing what the purpose, right? So last class was showing what the purpose. What's the number one thing you do before you go look at the house? When you pull them up and you decide which ones you want to go show?
Top five.
Top five?
Top five.
What do you do before you go show those houses?
Get them pre-qualified.
Go through the buyer's list.
Yep. After that, so they got them pre-qualified, they showed up to the buyer consultation, you went through the process to educate them, right? You pulled up their search with them, okay, to make sure we got all results, and then we narrowed it down to the top five. Okay, so we're ready to go look at the houses. Before we leave, what do?
Call the other agent.
Call the other agents, right? So you've shown the houses, you've already talked to the agents, now they want to write an offer on number 3 of 5. Remember that, Brian? Okay, so now what's the conversation going to be with that agent? Your buyer wants to write an offer, so what's the conversation you're going to have with that listing agent?
Do you have any offers?
Try to get them to disclose what their best offer is.
Yeah, do you have any offers? If the answer is no, my follow-up question would be, have you had any offers? Just because they don't have one right now doesn't mean they haven't had one, right? So we definitely want to look at how long has the property been on the market. If it's brand new and no offers, and we pulled our comps and did everything, we might need to come in real strong. If it's been on the market 30 days in this market, which is a seller's market, and they don't have any offers, and they haven't had any offers, that communicates something, right? Chances are it's probably overpriced. Okay.
Something's wrong with the house.
Something's up, right? Okay, so do you have any offers? No. Have you had any offers? No. What else could we want to ask?
What would your seller prefer?
In regards
Like-
to?
Closing dates, etc.
Yeah. Can you tell me what your seller's looking for in an offer? Doesn't mean we're going to offer it, right? But we definitely want to know. Because if they need 60 days closing so that they can pack and move and do all this kind of stuff, but my buyer's got to be in a place like tomorrow, this may not work out. So then I'll have to ask them follow-up questions. Would they be willing to accept a 30 day? Those types of things, okay? That rings true more so in asking those questions when they have multiple offers, right? Because let's say, yes, they have 3 offers, it's been on the market 2 days, right? So based on the other offers you have, what is your seller really looking for? What kind of close of escrow date? Anything else you can tell me that they really want to see in the offer or what they don't want to see? What they definitely don't want to see a contingency. They don't want to pay closing costs. Yeah, all these different things come into play, right? Now again, it doesn't mean you're going to structure your offer that way, but you know what their hot buttons are, so that if you need closing costs, let's say, how can you compensate in another way to the seller for them to give in for the closing costs, right? Because the best negotiation is really creating a win-win situation, where buyer gets what they need, seller gets what they need, right? The only way you can create that is to ask questions and find out more information about what they really want. You know what I mean? Real quick tangent. There's some kind of fable, I don't know if it came out of the Bible or something like this, but basically it's these 2 people were fighting over an orange. And So someone came in and said, well, how about you just cut it in half? Well, no, that won't work. I need the orange, they need the orange. So how do we get a win-win here? Well, what do you really need from the orange? I'm botched that completely, I understand that, but follow me. Well, one person just wanted the rind, while the other person wanted the inside. So if you would have asked the right questions, what is it about the orange that you need? We would have instantly gotten to the heart of the issue and been able to create a win-win situation, right? So it's no different with this. You want to get your offer accepted, you got to find out what the seller's looking for. And again, if your buyer can't meet that, how do you come to terms? Okay? Yet, predominantly in my career as a listing agent, what I see from agents is not even a single phone call. I just get an offer in my email. I never talk to the agent. I don't know anything. Like, they never even called me to ask if I had any offers, nothing. Just magically, poof, an offer appears. Are they really representing their client's best interests? Not even the least bit, right? Okay, so having a conversation with the listing agent is vital. You need to get into a relationship, because if that offer gets accepted, you're going to be in business together. And your goal is to get your clients to the closing table with the least amount of headaches, shortest amount of time, right? Okay, so let's talk about how we can construct that offer to make it a win-win. One of the best things you can do, especially with multiple offers, is educate the seller on who your buyer is. Do you know what I mean by that? What's one way you could educate the seller on who your buyer is and why it's so important that your buyer purchases this house?
Have your buyer make a video if they're,
Could do that.
I think you taught us that in another class or something.
Yeah.
You can have them write a letter
Letter.
to the seller,
Write a letter.
you know, explaining who they are, you know, I've got so many kids, our family loves this house, we'd love to be in this area.
Yeah.
Or they have family in the neighborhood, they want to live close to their
Yeah.
brother.
My mom lives across the street and I'm her caretaker. I mean, might that carry some weight with that seller when they have multiple offers? Yeah. You'd be surprised. Some people actually have a heart and they care who their home is going to. I've had a number of clients, even in 2005, literally within hours, multiple offers. Within hours of going live. And my sellers wanted to sell to this young couple with kids for a lower price than the cash investors were offering. Because they loved their house so much, they wanted to go to a good family. That happens. So, that's something to think about too. How do you let the seller know who your client is and why they want this house? The first property I ever went to buy, they had 7 offers. It was during the boom. And I wrote a little letter, said, hey, you know, newly married and new kid, this is gonna be perfect for my family, da 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 da. They took our offer. It was all true stuff, you know what I mean? But it can carry a ton of weight. So if nothing else, you definitely want to write a little short story, so to speak. If they write it up, all the better, right, in their words. Maybe a picture of the family. You'd be surprised. That could be the one thing, the tipping point, that makes them take your offer over another, even if you don't have the best terms. Okay? So get into a relationship with a listing agent. Make a connection between your buyer and the seller.
So, and none of that is illegal on persuading the seller to do whatever?
Not in the least bit.
Okay.
Nope, they have full
Okay.
reign to take any offer they want.
Fair housing issue about families versus not families.
No,
or
because
anything like that.
they're not discriminating. They can have a preference towards that. You know what I mean? If the seller said, I won't sell to a family, that may be different, right? But selecting this person over that person could just be a matter of preference. Yeah. The issue with fair housing is if they refuse to accept an offer because of a protected class. That's when you're going to run into some bad stuff. Okay? Do you have a question? Okay.
So what if you know though, like say you have 5 offers on a home and one of them is this, you know, new family, new kid, you know, ideal for this house. The other one is, you know, orange. They're orange people and those people don't want orange people living in their house and they're offering more. And the homeowner says, well, those people are orange. Even though they offered less, I want to sell to the family. What do you have to do in that instance?
We're getting more in a fair housing class in that
Right.
situation. The proper broker response is you have to let them know that you will not engage in that kind of activity because that violates fair housing. And if they're going to put that stipulation in the listing that they will not sell to a certain ethnic class, you need to cancel listing immediately. Period. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the appropriate response. However, I don't think I've ever had anyone do that. Not to say that you might not ever encounter that, but it's pretty rare. Although it does happen. There's plenty of case law with that, and you learn those types of situations in all the fair housing classes. So, okay. So get into relationship with the listing agent. Educate the seller on who your client is. Just to make a connection between buyer and seller, right? So we're starting off this entire process on the right foot. Everybody knows each other and is happy with the situation, ideally. Okay. All right. So let's talk about terms. What's the number one thing on the contract that the seller's going to look for?
Price.
Price, right? Price carries a lot of weight. Okay. So how do you help your buyer get to offering a fair price?
By pulling comps.
Pulling comps. What else?
How much interest is in the property?
Yeah, that can have an impact.
Inventory.
So yeah, let's dive deeper on that. How much interest is in the property? How do we educate our client to show how much interest is in this property?
Oh, do one of those sheets.
Supply and demand analysis. There you go.
Yep.
It was on the tip of your tongue, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's been on the market 2 days and there are 8 cards sitting on an island. That kind of speaks.
Speaks for itself, doesn't it? Yeah.
Other people come while you're showing it or waiting.
Mm-hmm. So nothing replaces the supply and demand analysis though, okay? Because again, that's part of the buyer consultation process we went over. Before you look at houses, that's a good thing to pull. Because you're setting that precedence with them so they have that mindset that in the geographical area I'm looking, which is Arrowhead Ranch or Surprise, it doesn't matter. We pulled the supply and demand in their price point that they're looking for houses. And based on that information, it's gonna show us a story. Very little homes for sale, a lot of demand, which means more buyers going to the same property. So you're gonna have to be competitive with your offer when we find you that right house. Okay? You set that up front, that way when they find the right house, there's very little discussion on price. Okay? So you basically have to train them, and train them with data, not you telling them. Because if you're always relying on just telling them and not showing them, then you're gonna run into like what was mentioned out there in the team meeting this morning. Well, I had to write an offer, it didn't get accepted. I had to write another one, didn't get accepted because they're not listening to me. They want X, Y, and Z, and they're not going to get it in this market. Until finally they say, fine, we'll pay our own closing costs. Well, that's because you were telling them, not showing them what was. Okay? All right. So, purchase price. Educate them on what the market is, what the demand is in that house, based on evidence of cards, other showings, and supply and demand analysis. Okay? Again, our job is to lead them down the path to make a decision, right? So sometimes people just need a certain amount of information before they can make an informed decision. And you want them to make the best informed decision possible, right? So you can get the offer accepted. All right, well, you got to supply them with that information then. So you got to understand how to pull it, how to digest it, how to explain it so they understand, okay? All right. So purchase price. We're going to actually come back to that and how all the other terms of the contract can affect the purchase price. Because could a seller get 2 offers? One, let's say they're listed at $250. They get an offer for $255, so $5,000 over, an offer for $250, and still totally want to take the one for $250. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because of other terms. Mm-hmm. So it's not just price. Mm-hmm. Price just happens to be the first thing that sellers are going to look at. Mm-hmm. Okay? So if you're coming in too low, that's going to be a red flag for them. It's like a first impression. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You come in way low in the offer, and immediately some people will just check out. Nope, too low, reject it. Well, hang on a second, there's more. So how do we structure the offer so they don't get that shock? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll come back to purchase price after we kind of go over all the other terms and how the different terms affect price. Okay. So how about earnest deposit?
1%.
1% is a good rule of thumb, right?
Or more if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. The more the better. So, if you were selling your house and you had two offers that were largely identical, and the only separating factor was one was offering $1,000 earnest money, and the other was offering $5,000, which one would you want to go with?
5,000.
The 5,000, right? They are more of an earnest buyer than the other one. Yeah, they're putting more on the table. Doesn't that communicate something to the seller? What does that communicate?
Stronger interest.
Stronger interest.
That could be the agent's fault too, for not telling them, like, the more you put, the
Educating
better.
them.
Yeah, educating them.
Typically, the crappiest offers I've seen is because it's the crappier agent. That's why education is so important. If you understand the dynamics and you can explain it, the better you can explain it, the better educated your buyer is to make better informed decisions. Yeah. So earnest money. We went over that during the buyer consultation, but that's definitely a strong term. A seller wants to see the most amount of earnest money possible. Yeah? Okay. Closing date. How do you know what a good closing date is, what a bad closing date is?
Talk to the seller.
Talk to the listing agents to find out what the seller's looking for, right? Okay. Also, regardless of that, it still needs to be in alignment with what your buyer needs. Yeah. Typically, not always, typically the shorter the closing date, the better, right? Make sure you're not setting yourself up for a failure by not giving enough time, though. So who could tell you how much time you need to close?
Lender.
The buyer's lender. Exactly. Okay? So make sure you're working in relation with them on how much time do they need. Now, what's the difference between them needing 20 days and 30 days to close?
10 days.
Or 10 days? Yeah, there's lenders that can do it in 10
It
days.
could be a paycheck for the buyer.
Yeah.
It could be, well, the buyer hasn't given me all their documents yet. So I'm going to need 30 days because once I get them, I need to have a process, right? Versus, oh no, the buyer gave me everything up front. We only need 10 days to close. Once we get a good appraisal, clear title, we're good to go. Yeah? So you need to know where your buyer's at in that process of getting pre-qualified. So you know what close of escrow date you can offer. Yeah? Okay. How about type of financing? How can that come into effect to help you get your offer accepted?
Well, VA loans are harder and they take longer, so most people would pick a conventional or FHA over a VA.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
VA could take longer, right?
But not always.
And also money, they don't have a down payment and the closing costs are paid by the seller automatically for VA.
Some of the fees that are non-allowables.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, how does an appraisal come into effect with type of financing?
FHA appraisals are much tougher.
So are VA ones too.
If they
Thank you,
accept,
Michelle.
if they have, let's say the seller has 3 offers: a VA, an FHA, and a conventional. Yeah, all identical terms and price. If the seller takes the VA or the FHA offer, go through the process, inspections, fine, and then the appraisal happens. The appraisal comes in way low, you have an issue. Not only does your buyer have an issue, but so does the seller. Because those appraisals will run with the property for a certain amount of time. Okay? Plan on, I think it's different with FHA and VA. I think some changes just occurred. It's either 60 or 90 days now. So, it's,
Months.
they shrunk it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, at least on FHA they did. So, the deal falls out of escrow. Seller wants to put the house back on the market, right? And they had an FHA appraisal. They can't go sell it to another FHA buyer. Got to be conventional or VA. Yeah. So that's something I would look at as a listing agent. Is if I had 3 offers, I'm gonna look at the financing. Instantly, I want to gravitate towards the conventional. It's scoring higher because of the type of financing.
Why can't you sell it to another FHA just because they're you can sell it, it would just be for a reduced price.
Correct.
Okay.
You wouldn't be able to. You'd have to use that appraisal.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. Absolutely. So it's going to run with the property. So if they want to drop the price, then they would have just closed with the original one.
Right.
Or if a buyer's willing to pay the difference in cash. unusual, but it can happen. Okay, so
You get a cash buyer though, and you don't have that financing contingency.
Absolutely.
So even if it's less money, it might be more solid than a FHA that they need closing costs or whatever.
yeah, could be. It's another
It might be
factor,
worth
right?
the headache,
Yeah.
the $5,000 or whatever.
When you get multiple offers on your listing, you have to digest all of them so that when you explain to the seller what's the pros and the cons of each offer, right? And so the better you understand all those different terms and how they're going to interact, the better you can educate your buyer on how they can structure their offer to be the best offer. It's not just price, right? Okay. Closing costs. That's a hot button, right? Especially in most of our price point in the West Valley. A lot of buyers like to ask for closing costs, right? How does that affect the offer? That's obvious, right? We went over that in the buyer consultation with them, that if you're asking for $5,000, you've got to subtract that from the price that you're offering. So if you're offering $250, but you're asking the seller to pay $5,000 of your closing costs, you're really offering $245, right? So let's say the buyer doesn't have the cash for their closing costs. What can you do then to get the seller to pay the closing costs even though the seller doesn't want to?
Raise the offer.
Put it 5,000 above the.
Yeah, add it on top.
But if the appraisal comes in low, I mean, isn't the, and the seller doesn't want to lower his price, he can walk away. And then, and does the buyer get his earnest money back at that point?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
But he still wasted money on an inspection and stuff.
And appraisal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a risk,
Mhm.
definitely. However, that's why we pull comps before we write the offer.
That's true.
So if they're asking $250 and we pull comps and it's really worth like $240, maybe $245 on a good day, and here we are, we're going to offer $250 and then add our closing costs on top, $255. Your buyer's going to have to make a decision. Are you willing to gamble this almost $1,000 between inspection and appraisal, knowing full well that it's really not worth $245? On a good day, it's worth, $255. It's really worth like $245. So, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are you willing to take that gamble? Because I don't see it. I don't see it appraising.
I had one like that. I thought it was overpriced. My buyer still wanted to put an offer on it. They countered, so we got to a purchase price, but I thought it was still too high. But I started off with having the seller pay for the appraisal. I was like, if you feel like it's worth that, then you put the money up for it.
Absolutely.
And I did.
Yeah.
So my buyer didn't take that risk of paying for the appraisal.
Yep.
And
you
he came
can.
in under.
I did. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can ask the seller, hey seller, you pay for the appraisal up front, and if it appraises and the deal goes through, the buyer will reimburse at closing.
Yeah.
So you're really not out the cash. But since you, the seller, are asking X, we'll give you that so long as the appraiser agrees with that's what the value is. So that's an excellent solution. Yeah. So with the closing costs though, could you just increase the price by 1% even though you're asking for 3%? You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be all or nothing, right? You can make the numbers be whatever they need to be to make the deal go together.
Yeah, or you can put a flat out dollar amount, like, most people don't do, but.
Yeah, you can. So another thing that I'd really like you to be cognizant of is anytime you're asking for a percentage, how do you figure the math on that? So let's say it's $250 and the buyer's asking for 3%. 3% of $250,000 is $7,500.
Yeah.
So you just add $7,500 on top? No, because if you take $250, add $7,500 on top, you're still asking for 3% of that new number, right? So if you do the math on that, 3% of $257.5 is going to be more than $7,500 because you're taking 3% of a larger number now. So you may want to write that down, that the way to calculate that is you take the offer price, in this case $250, you're going to divide by 100 minus the percentage of closing costs. So let's say it was only 2.5%. You would subtract 2.5 from 100, okay, which would be 97.5, right? So you take 250 divided by 0.975. That'll give you the number you need to offer so that the seller will still get a net offer of 250. Follow me? Does anyone have any questions on that?
Just have to check your math. Just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm like.
Do it on a calculator and you'll see what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, okay? All right, so be very cognizant of that, because what most people do is they just take that amount, whatever the percentage is, and they add it on top. Well, the seller's not gonna get that amount if you do the math that way, okay? All right. Okay, inspection period. So default inspection period, the length of that is what?
10 days.
10 days, okay. Multiple offers, could that be a deciding factor for a seller of how long your inspection period is? Some buyers ask for more time because they got to go back to where they came from, and then they're going to come back to the inspection period later, so they need a 15-day. Yeah? Could you shorten that inspection period?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you need 10 days to investigate everything? Maybe, maybe not, right? If it's a slam dunk kind of cookie cutter home, let's say in Surprise, and it's only a couple years old, I mean, what kind of things you're going to do? Termite, regular home inspection, right? Now, if it was an older home, the AC's 15 years old, there's a pool and the equipment's old, you might need an HVAC person, you might need a pool person. So in that situation, you're going to probably want close to your 10 days, right? So you got to size up the situation and see, is that a term that we can cut off a few days? Again, you got to put your seller's hat on. If I got 2 offers, one person wants a 10-day inspection period, this other one wants a 5-day. Well, from my perspective as a seller, the shorter amount of time I have the house off the market, the better, if this is not going to work. So 5-day is way better. So again, that's just another term that you can use to structure the entire deal, okay? I literally wrote offers for myself on flips was 48-hour inspection period. You know what I mean? It doesn't need to be 10 days. How fast can you get your inspector in there and get a report back? 2, maybe 3 days? You know what I mean? Maybe call your home inspector. Hey, what's your availability this week? I'm writing an offer. You know what I mean? They're your business partners.
If it's summer and the air conditioner is 20 years old, it might take a few days to get a HVAC guy out there
Yeah,
to give a free inspection.
absolutely. But you see, like each one of these little points, if you start shaving things off and just making it slightly better, like a little more earnest money, like a 7-day inspection period instead of a 10, like all that stuff is going to start adding up at the end of the day to make your offer what it is compared to a standard offer. $1,000 earnest money, 10-day inspection period. You see what I'm saying? So all these little things are going to matter and add up in your favor. Okay? Okay. Home warranty. Do you encourage your client to buy one, not buy one? Does it depend?
These are 1 year.
Get a warranty. Yeah. Especially if it's a slightly older house, right? Okay. So who pays for that?
Bye.
Buyer. Okay.
The agent.
Could be a gift. Okay.
Seller can offer it.
Seller might already be offering it.
Split it.
Split it 50-50. Ask the seller to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, how many different ways can you structure this, right?
A lot.
So at the end of the day, what you're keeping in mind is, what is our net offer amount? So if we're offering $250, but we're asking for $5,000 closing costs. Oh, and now by the way, the buyer wants a home warranty of $550. Okay, we're gonna have to subtract that, because that's what the seller's gonna look at, is what's my net, right? So just be cognizant of how that comes into play. Now, if the buyer's making a strong offer, full price, no closing costs, but we do want a home warranty, we're only talking, the cost of the home warranty. So again, if you can ask the listing agent, hey, what are the terms of your other offers? Would you mind telling me? Some agents will tell you, very few, but some will. And the only way to find out, ask. Yeah. Why would you be afraid to ask? You're representing who? Buyer. So isn't it your duty to get all the information you possibly can that would be material to your buyer? Well, terms of other offers, if you can find out that information, would be material to your buyer. So they know how to counteract those offers to get those accepted, right? Okay. All right, moving down the contract, we come to additional terms. So I'm going to give you a little caveat here. You see on your handout, big bold down here. Please do not write in colorful, creative terms in additional terms if they're not a template that I've given to you or the broker has without running it by me first. Please. Okay? If you need something creative put in the contract, bounce it off me. Okay? Get some feedback. You got to make sure that it's not ambiguous. You got to make sure there's an if-then statement so that escrow knows what to do, because these are instructions, right? So please, if you're ever going to write in something fancy and creative, let me know first. Okay? All right. So
Can you elaborate on fancy and creative?
Yep.
I mean,
that's what we're going to...
okay.
Yeah. So what are some additional terms you might see?
Buyer wants window blinds put on the windows.
Okay.
Or the buyer wants a garage door opener installed.
Yeah.
What if the refrigerator, washer, dryer are not included, but you're asking for it in additional terms?
There's a place in the contract just to check the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if it's not included, can you check those boxes?
Yeah.
You can ask for it.
Request them.
Okay.
But you're saying you go in there, the house is vacant, and there are no appliances. So you write in the additional terms like seller to install a refrigerator, washer, and dryer.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So-
what I was thinking.
Yeah, those are some additional terms. But what about something like situational? I'll give you an example. Here's one right here. In a strong seller's market, where a seller could have multiple offers, what if your buyer is willing to pay far more than the list price, but they don't want to pay a lot more than they have to?
Acceleration clause.
Acceleration clause. So I have one here for you. So here's an example. In the event another offer is presented to the seller before acceptance of this offer, buyer agrees to increase their offer to that amount, to the amount of that offer plus whatever amount you want, $1,000, $1,500, $5,000, with the total offer amount not to exceed X, on the condition that seller provides buyer a copy of the buyer's signed offer from the other party. So what we're saying is this. Let me give you an actual example.
That's legal?
Huh?
That's legal?
Absolutely. Let me give you an actual example that I used. So I was representing this young guy. He's buying a house. They were asking $495. There were 2 offers on the property, and he said, "I'm willing to pay $525, but I don't want to pay $525 if I don't have to." I said, "No problem." I used this exact clause, and I said, "We'll beat any other offer by $5,000, not to exceed $525." That's the max he was willing to pay. So we ended up paying $505 for the property. Somebody offered full price, another person offered $500, so we ended up paying $505, which was $5,000 above. All they needed to do is show me page 1 of the offer, that they actually had an offer. I prefer to get the whole thing, you know what I mean? Show me that there's another offer that actually exists, then how we're beating it and why we're beating it to arrive at that final price, right? So a couple elements you need there is how much will you beat the other offer by, and what's the max amount you're willing to pay? Because otherwise it'll go on forever.
But what if it was like matching terms? Because if, say in that situation, somebody got offered $520, but they want 3% closing costs, do you matching
Yes.
the terms of, like, if you were going to pay 3% closing costs on that offer, we want the same deal?
Yes, so what you want to put in here is the net offer amount.
Okay.
Net,
Okay.
yeah. So those are the kind of additional terms that you could utilize to get your offer accepted. An escalation clause is a biggie. Yeah.
So, that property was listed at $495, because you wouldn't use one if you're offering less than asking, because they would just counter knowing that you are willing to pay more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could they counter anyway, knowing that you're willing to pay more, you know?
Absolutely, they could.
you're not giving away your cards by telling them the top that they're willing to pay. You know what I mean, like showing your cards,
You kind of are. So
but they don't know if your buyer's willing to pay that.
But you
Regardless.
already know that there's multiple offers.
you already know there's multiple offers,
Right.
and your buyer said, "I want this house."
Okay.
Like my buyer had to have this house.
Is that more of an issue, like say if it were like a situation of dual agency, that would be a little bit more probably frowned upon in that case?
Expand on that. In what way?
Like say that you've got a property for sale and we work together, okay? And I find a buyer and your buyer wants to sell their home for $500,000. They've got a couple of offers, but I've already told you, you know, I've told you that my buyer is willing to spend up to $525. I mean, isn't that kind of like, I shouldn't probably necessarily go forward and tell you that yet?
That's up to your client.
Okay.
Because you see, at the heart of agency is confidentiality.
Right.
And confidentiality would be, for you representing a buyer, you would not want to tell me, the listing agent, what your buyer's willing to pay.
Right.
Unless your buyer tells you to.
Okay.
Like, no, tell them I will give them this much because I want the house.
Okay.
And on the other side of that, the confidentiality I have with my seller is I'm not going to tell you what's the least amount they're willing to accept.
Okay. Gotcha.
Right? So if you have instructions from your buyer that, hey, Brian, get me this house, I'm willing to pay X, but I don't want to if I don't have to,
Mhm.
right? An escalation clause would be the way to accomplish that. That will beat any offer by this much up to that much.
Gotcha.
But we might come in here. Like in that case.
I don't understand why you're asking about the dual agency thing though.
Disclosing, just kind of disclosing something that my buyer, like, maybe they don't want me to tell you, but I told you, I think that would be the issue.
Well,
With that.
I mean,
If your buyer doesn't want the seller to know
Right.
the max they're willing to pay,
Mhm.
you wouldn't use an escalation clause.
Sure.
It wouldn't matter if your agency or not.
Okay.
Right. Because yes, by doing the escalation clause and saying we'll pay up to X would likely be showing your cards. And the only time you would want to do that is if you knew you had to be super competitive and you just lay it on the table and say, listen, this is the max I can do. If you're willing to take that, fantastic. If not, that's the best I can do. So you kind of just cut into the chase with the games of negotiations.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it depends on how important it is to your buyer to get that house.
Okay.
Okay. Answer your question? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to get into another additional term, but first let's go to the HOA fees. So if the property has an HOA, you get the HOA addendum, what kind of fees could be on there?
Transfer, disclosure.
Transfer,
improvement.
capital
Capital
improvement,
improvement.
yeah? Who pays disclosure fee?
Seller.
Seller, always. It says right in the addendum, right? So we just need to worry about all the other fees. Again, that's one more point to point out to the buyer that whatever we ask the seller to pay for, we have to subtract that from the offer amount. Because that's what the seller's gonna look at net, okay? So that too has an impact. Now with those fees, again, just remember it doesn't need to be black or white. Only seller pays for that or only buyer. Like we could split it. We can roll it into that 3% that we're asking for. That's to include those fees, right? So just make sure you're looking at it from all angles, okay? Any questions on any of that so far? All right. So let's go to a scenario.
Wait, I'm sorry, I have a quick question on HOA fees. I've had people fill it out, like the buyer's supposed to fill out the HOA, the last page. But I've had sellers have it already filled out. And they're not supposed to do that, right? Like,
Right. So
because it says on the top, buyers, you know.
yeah. Okay.
It drives me nuts.
So in that situation, let's say you get the HOA addendum from the document tab in the MLS,
Yeah.
right? And the page 1 and 3 are already filled out. Print off page 1, you get a blank page 3, fill it out and submit it,
Okay.
okay? Because page 1 is the seller's disclosure of what are the fees, right? Page 2 is a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And then page 3 is who's going to pay for those fees. So if that's already pre-filled in, which does happen, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you just write us a contract too? You know what I mean?
So the opposite happened to me on my last one. The agent didn't take the HOA addendum out of the documents tab, sent me a blank one, so page 1 wasn't filled out. They filled out page 3, and so I didn't even realize how much HOA fees were because they weren't on the document that I was looking at. So it wasn't something I relayed to my client initially, although they saw, you know, I sent it to them, they saw it. It's not something we talked about when I kind of
Right.
presented the offer.
Yeah.
And of course, they had the buyer paying, or the seller paying for them, so I think we're stuck with it.
So let's say you're writing an offer for your buyer. You can't get a hold of a listing agent to ask any questions, and there's no HOA addendum in the contract. But there's an HOA. What do you do in that situation?
You can contact the number from the listing.
You
See.
could. Let's say it's 7 o'clock at night, and you got to get this offer in now.
Look at other houses in the subdivisions that are on the market or even sold and
You
see
could.
what the HOA fees were
But
for
I
that.
wouldn't fill that out though.
No.
It's a seller, it says the seller to fill it out.
Yeah, because on the bottom page, one says sellers certify that this information is true to the best of their ability.
So what would you do? Just fill out page 3?
Or not do,
And
not
send it?
send it with it?
I would not send an HOA addendum.
Okay, yeah.
However, you'd have to write that in additional terms.
Okay.
That seller did not provide HOA addendum. Seller will provide to buyer within X amount of time after contract acceptance. And you still have to identify who pays what fees, right? I mean, think about this. So you don't have an HOA addendum, but you're sending over a contract. And you're saying, hey, seller, you're supposed to give us the HOA fees within 3 days of contract acceptance, right? Okay, cool. So you get that from the seller 3 days later, and it says capital improvement fee of $1,500, HOA transfer fee of $400. Okay, now who's going to pay for that? That was never negotiated. So that's got to be a term in the contract. Seller shall provide buyer with the HOA addendum within 3 days of contract acceptance, and blank pays for any and all fees associated with the transfer of the property. Or buyer will split with seller 50-50, whatever those fees may be. So you still have to outline who's paying what. It's part of the contract to be agreed upon. So if you don't have the data, you could go to the MLS. My word of caution with that is most agents are very lazy, and they did that when they took the listing. They went back to some old ones. And what happens usually January 1st? Like HOA changed their fee structures.
But it might give you an idea. I mean, if
It might. It might
if
give
it's
you a
gone up
ballpark.
$2 a quarter, that's not a big deal, but it could have tripled, or there could be a capital improvement.
I would just strongly caution your buyer that this may be entirely inaccurate. So, if let's say you made a good offer, could you not just put in additional terms that the sellers to pay all the fees? And if they know what the fees are, they can counter that back. You know what I mean? But if you don't have any data, you're going to have to err on the side of caution. Okay? So make sure that's clearly lined out. Okay. So let's take a look at a scenario here. House is listed for $235,000. It's been on the market 3 days. Comps show a value of $235,000 to $245,000. So what they're asking is not over market value. In fact, it's a little under. Okay. Supply and demand for this price point is 59%. If you haven't taken that class yet, that ratio means nothing to you. So I'll fill you in. That's a very high ratio. It means it's a strong seller's market. Okay. So it's a strong seller's market, and they're underpriced. Got it? Okay. So the owner is purchasing another home, and that's contingent upon the closing of their property that they're selling. Seller would like to place an offer on another home once they get an offer on their house. Follow me? Okay. The MLS Plano says that the washer, dryer, refrigerator stay. HOA fee is $400, transfer fee. Okay. So here's your buyer. Young couple in their mid-30s, 2 kids, first-time buyers. They're qualified up to $250,000. They have $20,000 cash in the bank. They've been saving their money for several years. The buyer would like to spend as little as possible since they want to replace the kitchen countertops to granite because they're from mica currently. So they got 20 grand, but they don't want to necessarily put it all up front for the purchase. Okay. Buyer wants to ask for 3%, but would settle for 1.5 seller concessions. Buyer does not need appliances, but would like to have them. and buyer wants a home warranty. So that's a lot of pieces there, but is that not kind of a Reader's Digest version at best of what could be, right? You could have even way more variables than that. Okay, so how could you structure this offer? Because you're representing the buyer.
235 escalates to 245.
Sure, you can put an escalation clause in there. Will be any other verifiable offer by $1,000, $500, up to X. Yeah, I would definitely use an escalation clause. We're going to offer 235 up to whatever we need to beat. Yeah? Okay. So one of the biggest things in that scenario was the owner needs to buy a house, but them buying that house is contingent upon them selling their house, right? So how can we create a win-win so the seller can accomplish that? Let's say we call the listing agent and they have 4 offers. And your buyer says, Heather, get me this house. I want this house. I have a little clause for you. If you look back on the bottom of the first page, let me read this to you. Seller shall have blank days from contract acceptance or by an actual date, you can put in one or the other, to acquire an accepted contract on a home for the seller to purchase. Buyer's inspection period and all other timeframes shall begin upon the date referenced above or by written removal of this contingency by the seller. So what we're saying is, hey seller, we're buying your property and we're going to give you 10 days to go identify and get accepted offer on another property. However, our 10-day inspection period doesn't begin until that your time is up or you've given us written authorization on day 5 that, hey, we don't need the balance of the 10 days. We found a house and we got our offer accepted. Cool, now our time frame will start.
It's like a seller contingency instead of a buyer's contingency.
Yeah.
But how come we don't have like a legit form for that? You know?
I don't understand the benefits
Not
of
as
this
smart as
either.
Justin.
I don't get it.
Yeah, because most people don't understand how this works. And here's the truth of the matter. Most agents don't care. They just want the deal to close so they get paid.
Yeah.
We're in sales. So they're not really looking out for the client's best interest, they're looking out for their own paycheck. So if I give my client a contingency, I could spend all this work just for them to bail out, and now I don't get paid and I waste all this time and effort. That's called service, right? That's how you get repeat and referral business for free, because you protect and promote people's interests. It's a law of compensation. Give more than you expect to receive in payment, and you'll always have plenty of payment coming in. So, your question was?
I'm not understanding how it benefits either side.
Okay, so most sellers that are going to sell their house and then buy are most nervous about what?
Being homeless.
Being homeless. Yeah, well, hey agent, listing agent of mine, me the seller, we get a contract on my house, I got 30 days. Well, I need 30 days to close on a house once I find one, but I don't even have one identified yet. I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm full of anxiety. And you say, well, it's just the way it works.
I was in that situation. We found the house we wanted, but we didn't sell our house, and so
So if that same seller who's anxious and nervous about this whole process, because I could be homeless, they get 3 offers and they're like, well, that's fantastic, but I'm still scared. And this offer comes in that may not even net them the most amount of money. It might be $3,000 shorter than the highest offer and not have an escalation clause. But it does say, hey seller, we'll give you, if you accept our offer, we'll give you 10 days to go identify a property. If you can't find one, we cancel. Does that seller have a little more peace of mind? Yep. Because now they have an offer, which was what they want, and they got time to go find a property. And if they can't, they don't have to sell.
So they're in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And did you represent your buyer to the fullest extent? Yeah, you got your offer accepted.
But you can also do it, and after that, 10 days, then the contract goes, you know, whatever, because they can go rent a house. They realize they can't find one right now and they can go rent a house or something.
Mhm.
You don't necessarily have to cancel it.
Correct. Yeah. It's optional. Okay. Now, that's the way that I worded it if you're representing the buyer. If I'm representing the seller, let's say you have a listing and same situation, seller needs to sell and then buy, right? You could put in here, seller shall have 10 days from contract acceptance or by X date to acquire an accepted contract on a home for the seller to purchase. If seller does not acquire accepted contract to purchase a subsequent property, seller may cancel this contract and buyer's earnest money shall be refunded to buyer. So if I'm representing the seller, I want that in there.
So you're countering with that,
Yeah.
with the wording that the buyer said,
Mhm.
plus that clause.
If I'm representing the buyer, I'll take that highlighted part out. I don't want the seller to cancel. You know what I mean? We want the house. So I may not give them that out, yet I am giving them time. Okay? So it's a judgment thing. Okay? All right, so moving back to the situation, we got the escalation clause, right, up to $245, but we're offering $235. We'll beat any verifiable offer by $1,000. We're going to give the seller a contingency, 10 days, to go find another property. So what do you think about the refrigerator and washer and dryer? Should we ask for that? The buyer wants it, but they don't have to have it. So what's one way you can get a win-win? There's
Well, it's
many
already in
ways.
the MLS
Ask them
that they
if
convey, so.
Ask them if they
Ask 'em?
care to take it or not. They may be like, no, I have new, I'm not taking that.
It's almost baked into the cake if they put it in the MLS that.
What if the agent made a
they
mistake
stay.
and just unexperienced listing agent?
Or they were just really trying to make their listing look good. They may still want it, they'd rather keep it, but they're willing to let it go.
Mhm.
True.
Mhm. Based on the offer. Yeah.
If the agent made the mistake and put it in the listing, isn't the agent responsible for making sure that those appliances are supplied upon?
Well, the seller signs the contract.
If the seller signs a contract and didn't realize the appliances were in there, which I don't know how you'd miss that, but let's say,
Right.
and close of escrow comes, and agent says, make sure you leave the refrigerator, washer, and dryer, and the seller says, what are you talking about? We're taking those. And they said, no, it's in the contract. Yeah, the listing agent might be on the hook for that. So how about this? Here's just another alternative, right? That's what it's all about. How many different ways can you see this puzzle coming together? The buyer doesn't need the appliances, but they'd like to have it because they want to keep some cash to do renovations, right? What's wrong with saying we'd like the appliances if the seller elects to leave them? Because what if the seller's undecided? Like, well, I don't know the house that I'm buying if it's going to have appliances. If it has appliances, I don't mind leaving them. But if it doesn't, I want to take them.
Right.
Well, here you go. Leave them if you can. If you can't, cool.
So you're writing that in there.
Yeah. Because I don't want them to say, oh, well, we don't need them, so we're going to sell them. No, we'll take them if you don't need them. So you could write it in that way. That buyer would like the seller to leave the appliances, however, not required. It's just a statement. You know what I mean? Again, that's something you should negotiate out with the agent verbally or through email. So you wouldn't necessarily need to put in the contract, but you can. Okay? All right. What about the 3% closing costs? Buyer would like the seller to pay for those.
So they can keep money in their pocket for the kitchen.
Yeah. But we also know the buyer said they'd like to ask for 3%, but they'd settle for 1.5%.
I would encourage them to go 1.5, considering days on market and their price position.
Yeah. Or just put the whole 3% on top. Right? Or maybe only 1.5% on top, and the buyer pays the other 1.5%. Again, to keep that number lower for appraisal purposes and financing and all of that, right? So are you starting to see like there's so many different ways you could cut this? So it all comes down to your own level of creativity. And how do you get more creative with this process?
More experience.
Do it a lot. You know what I mean? But when you become a value to your client, is when they have a want and you show them how they can fulfill that want because of your experience, your knowledge, and your expertise, your perspective on the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, the longer you're in this business, the more you'll come to realize that most agents are very linear thinking. You know what I mean? Like it's very cut and dry. Here's the price, here's the terms, and it's just standard. You know what I mean? They don't put a lot of effort into, hey, let's work it from different angles to create a win-win. Sincerely, when a seller has multiple offers and you've put a lot of thought into your offer on how to get your buyer exactly what they want and appeal to the seller's going to know it, and they'll gravitate towards your offer. Or you can just write a whole bunch of offers until finally you get one accepted. You know what I mean? So, again, what I want to impress upon you is you're only limited to your own level of creativity. However, as I said in the beginning of this, when you go to get creative with these kinds of terms that we're talking about, if you're not using a template, please run it by me first. Because you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you intended to mean one thing, but what you stated was something else. Okay? So that additional term section of the contract is our area to practice real estate law. So don't. You know what I mean? Run it by someone first. You know what I mean? Like myself, broker, whatever the case is. Have somebody else look at it if it's not already a template. Okay? All right. Any questions at all? No? Set? Okay.